right, good morning. We're going to get started. The clock is busy doing its clock thing. Looks like we're down a little bit this morning, but also knowing this class within about the next 6 or 7 minutes. The Good Baptist arrival time will occur. So we're going to be closing out this kind of whole late summer series I did with examining things in Scripture, hell, heaven, angels, and all that stuff. We're going to close it out with 3 more kind of what are theys, with those things that the internet loves to blow up on. The Nephilim from last week was one of them, but Leviathan, Behemoth, and then particularly in the King James, some mythological creatures that show up there. Because again, I believe that the Bible is to be understood. It shouldn't be this, what is this stuff? So we should understand this. So we're going to do that, and then next week I'm going to get back into a direct Bible study, and we're going to talk about freedom, which particularly at political season tends to be a thing, and we're going to look at the book of Galatians. Paul writing to a church in Galatia and the surrounding churches around there, and he's going to talk actually quite extensively about freedom and what freedom really looks like. So that's where we're going to go, and that will take us up close to the holidays, and we'll go from there. So with that, Pam, would you open us this morning?
Most gracious Lord, we come into your presence. Thank you for another day and land of the living. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your faithfulness. My Father, we thank you as you come to a time as this, my God. We thank you, my God, as you renew in our minds, my God, our thinking and our thoughts, my God, to your truth, my God, your judgment, your standard, my God. I pray, my God, as Pastor Harry goes forth with this Sunday school lesson, my God, that our hearts have been prepared, my God, the eyes of our understanding have been enlightened. To understand fully, my God, what you desire to show us in this season, my God, pertaining to your truth. And I pray for Pastor Harry, my God, that the things that you have imparted in his heart, my God, his teaching, my God, that he will come forth, my God, boldly, breaking down the lesson, my God, with clarity and understanding, my God. Give him the courage, my God, to speak your word, my God, and give us clear understanding, my God, so we can, my God, take this lesson, my God, and understand, my God, that it's you that's giving us the lesson, my God. And thank you, my God, because you bring us back, my God, to the beginning, my God. Help us remember, my God, because of this lesson, my God, we can be citizens now, my God, in this earth realm, my God, proclaiming your truth, my God, without fear, without apology, without manipulation, my God. And we thank you, my God, for bringing this far, my God. And I pray, my God, we'll all be one in this class today, my God, as you will disposition, my God. And we thank you, my God, for your truth, my God. In Jesus' name.
Amen. Let's go back very quickly and look at last week, kind of review that, the sons of God, the Nephilim, the Rephaim. By the way, kind of a little piece of Hebrew, anytime you see I am at the end of something, that means it's plural. So even think about the original, the first name for God in Genesis, he is Elohim. It begins to get that plurality of God. So anytime you're seeing some of these Hebrew names or Hebrew words and you see I am, you realize that the first half is to tell you something, and I am tells you that there's plural, there's more than one of them. So the Nephilim, obviously there's more than one, the Rephaim, the sons of God. The sons of God in the Old Testament, in the Bible, are always refers to what? When it says sons of God, what is that referring to every single time? It's been a week. Angels, thank you. Yes. According to Genesis 6:4, when were the Nephilim in the world? Before and after the flood. But again, we saw where after the flood, the word Nephilim becomes a word like the word Kleenex. It becomes a generic 4 giants, of which many ancient peoples wrote of the giants who lived in what we now know as the Middle East there, Palestine and so forth. In regards to the Nephilim, or giants, theologically speaking though, they are what?
Fallen angels.
Well, that's where they come from, the original. But theologically speaking, just the Nephilim in general are what? They are insignificant. They're unimportant. The modern internet and people who are trying to downplay the Christian worldview love to blow this kind of stuff up and try to make it all kinds of crazy things and to get Christians distracted and come off with, but they are theologically insignificant. They are here and they are not. The original gets taken care of by the flood. And then later, the sons of Anak, the Rephaim, all these giants, Og, the king of Bashan, all these guys that are mentioned in the later stages when Moses is coming back, when they're taking over the land. What happens to those giants? How does David deal with a giant? You and your shield bearer. I'm taking you out. So they are theologically insignificant, and we need to keep them in that place. As an interesting note, but we see how God deals with things that people think are insurmountable problems. The Rephaim appear to be the same giants as the what? As the Nephilim. Yeah, the Nephilim becomes that kind of Kleenex term. The Rephaim is in the later stages of the Old Testament. That refers to a people group, the sons of Anak, and we see them in at least several different people group names. So like everybody else, you end up having your family, but they're all big. So they appear to be the same giants there in the time of Moses as what Moses refers to as the Nephilim. So there's all of that Nephilim and Rephaim and sons of God totally and completely demystified. Before we really get started today, I want to talk a little bit about something that particularly young kids and oftentimes young boys really love to talk about, which is dinosaurs. I love me a good dinosaur. Anybody been back to Washington, D.C., Natural History Museum, and all the big dinosaur bone things they have set up there? It's just crazy, incredible. Of course, if you go up to Flagstaff, they've got some stuff up there as well. So this whole thing about dinosaurs. This is a topic that really divides Christians into 2 groups. The old earth creationism and the young earth creationism. Something we talked about in that Christian worldview when we went through that earlier this year. Those who believe in an older age for the earth, they tend to agree that the Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs, and it doesn't. And there's a very good reason for that. The word dinosaur wasn't invented
1920.
a little earlier than that, but well after both the Old and New Testament was written. According to the old earth paradigm, they were living millions of years before Adam ever walked the earth. So the men who wrote the Old Testament could not have seen a living dinosaur. Those who believe in a younger age, earth, agree that the Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs because that's a relatively new word. Instead, we see this word, the Hebrew root word Tananyan. Excuse me. And we see that a bunch of times in the Old Testament. But it gets translated into a number of different words in English Bibles. Words like sea monster, serpent, dragon, particularly in the in the King James Version. The word Tanyan gets translated as dragon. The Tenian are mentioned almost 30 times in the Old Testament in both describing land and sea animals, but using that one word for these amazing creatures. Every ancient civilization has some sort of art depicting giant reptilian creatures. Take a look at, well, it's 30 times on land and water. Take a look at this particular carving on the side of a Cambodian temple that they discovered in the jungle. What is that a picture of? That's a Stegosaurus that died millions of years before people were ever around. And yet, beautifully etched into the side of this Cambodian temple is a picture of a complete Stegosaurus that you would find in one of our books about dinosaurs today. Yeah, see, that's a problem. But every ancient civilization talks about creatures like dragons and other huge, amazing creatures. It's only in our very, and when I say modern, I mean very modern society, that we have said that that can't even be a possibility. Listen to this quote from Marco Polo in his writings when he went to China and wrote of seeing what he called huge serpents. And just listen to this description that he wrote of these serpents that he saw in the outlying lands of China. And tell me what you think this sounds like. At the forepart, near the head, they have 2 short legs, each with 3 claws, as well as eyes larger than a loaf and very glaring. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are large and sharp, and their whole appearance is so formidable that neither man nor any kind of animal can approach them without terror. This is Marco Polo describing some creature that he had not seen before when he went to China back in the, a raptor, something. There's a number of what we call dinosaurs that kind of fit this same general look, all within the dinosaur family. I am unabashedly a young earther. I am not sold on the 6,000 years. I'm not sold on any particular number. I've seen the people that have done the math and say, well, it's about, but also in reading the description from Genesis where death does not happen until man sins, the old earth has millions of years of death until Adam and Eve do their thing, and then suddenly they die. Of course, old earthers then like to make that spiritual and not physical because there's going to be millions of years of death coming up onto that. I tend to believe God's word is specific. The use of the word yom, when it's numeric, always refers to a 24-hour period, and it's very numeric in Genesis, so I'm unabashedly a young earther. And if you want to discuss that further in the future, I will be glad to do that because I have other evidences, scientifically speaking, from the science world that also point to that, i.e. the amount of sediments in the ocean. It goes on and on. You know that the moon is drifting away from us, right? Yes. Millimeters every year. But if it's been there for billions of years, the moon would be gone by the simple math that we have now. If it's been there for billions of years, it would be gone. Which, what does that do to our tides? And all the other. Anyway, so I don't want to get lost in that particular thing, but the Old Testament refers to something that we would probably use the word dinosaurs for a number of times. And even in our own recorded history, we have people recording creatures that seem to fit the bill. We have carvings of animals that these ancient Cambodians should have had no idea ever existed, because they died out millions and millions of years before they ever were humans, and complete pictures. And we have the same descriptors throughout ancient peoples around the globe. So with that in mind, let's take a look then at two mentioned in, and particularly in the book of Job, which is Leviathan and Behemoth. And we'll start with Leviathan. He's mentioned in a number of places, and some are very definitely used as a word picture for something else. But let's read three of them. Psalm 74:14.
Thou breakest the heads of the Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness.
Yeah, God kills one and feeds his people with one. Isaiah 27:1.
In that day the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea.
And then the descriptor, and we're going to go through this a lot more in a minute and further. Job 41:1-8, where God describes Leviathan.
Can you drive on the Leviathan with a push fishhook, or press down his tongue with a fork? Can you put a rope with his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you, or take him for your servant ever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you put him in a leash with the girls? Will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you feel his skin? Can you feel his skin with harpoons, on his head with fishing spears? Lay your hands on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again.
I love that. You take him on, you won't do it again. Yeah. So I think we have some definite reasons to understand what Leviathan is, because he gets mentioned a number of times in the Old Testament. If this creature, which is also very definitely found, again, people that want to go against Christianity in the Bible said, well, this is a part of Canaanite myth. They talk about Leviathan, their own word for it, same creature. Sometimes, as we saw in that passage in Isaiah, God uses Leviathan as a stand-in for God's enemies, saying, this is a formidable creature, much like Israel's enemies are formidable, so he'll use it as a word picture. They said, well, then that's what it always is. But if it does come from some subspecies of dinosaur, the Bible then shows that humans and dinosaurs were alive at the same time. And what you find in the Old Testament a lot is that God often uses illustrations from the natural world to explain his power. Because people can understand things if we tend to be visual. So God often uses descriptions of visual things to explain something else. The Bible says in Psalm 19:1 that all of creation proclaims the glory of God. All of it. All of it. When God says all, he means all. All of it proclaims the glory of God. And through then the example of Leviathan, God shows that he has power over everything, including this incredible creature. And then he uses it as later in Isaiah as a word picture for these formidable enemies of Israel, calling them Leviathan, because they would have understood that term. They knew the beast. So when the prophet Isaiah uses that, he's using something that his current audience would have understood as something, you don't mess with this. They already had the book of Job. They had read it. They had read God's description of that. And now God uses it as a picture of Israel's enemies and says, look how formidable that is, but look how easily I take care of it. We even see it in the book of Psalms where God destroys one and feeds his people with it. Well, yeah, something that big is going to feed a whole lot of people. So, in getting the descriptor from particularly the book of Job, we know that Leviathan is a large aquatic sea creature of some kind. The root of the name, and you actually heard it read, because then they go on and use the terms again, means coiled or twisted. So it can coil around, twist around. And whatever this monster of the sea is, or was, its strength was completely well known, and its uncontrolled nature. The people at the time, when this was written, they understood this thing is something you don't mess with. You don't try to put a hook into it and reel him in. You don't even throw a spear at. You leave this thing alone, or you're in for the fight of your life. Probably quite literally, the fight of your life. In Psalm 104, verses 25 to 26, God is praised as the one who created the living place for the Leviathan. Here is the sea, vast and wide, teeming with creatures beyond number, living things both large and small. There the ships move about, and Leviathan, which you formed to play there. Only God, only a great God, could have first created a creature like this and then made a place big enough for it to play in, for it to inhabit, for it to be able to move around. If you turn to Job 41, which Pam read as the first 8 verses, we get a very full, God gives a very definite description of this creature to Job. Says it can't be tied down or tamed, verses 1 through 5. It is frightening to look at, verse 9. It is best left alone. Yep, verses 8 and 10. But it has a very graceful form. It moves well. Verse 12. It is protected with scales. Verses 13, 15 to 17. Its chest is as impenetrable as its back. It breathes fire. This is where we're going to talk about that one particularly in a minute. And it can't be caged. No spear, sword, dart, javelin, arrow, stone, club, lance. God goes through the whole list. He picks every weapon that the current people have. He said none of them can defeat it. It leaves ruts on the land. When it comes up on the land, it leaves ruts on the land and produces a deep churning wake when it swims. That's something powerful swimming through the water. It's leaving a wake. And then I love his final statement. God, this is all God's description, by the way. This is God describing his creature. He says he has no equal in earth, a creature devoid of fear. He is the king of the sea. Unlike some of you are thinking from a song from the 60s and Flipper. See, I know my audience. This is the king of the sea. Not a weapon that man has formed at this point can touch this thing. Completely covered in scales, fearing nothing. When it swims, there's literally a wake caused. If it comes up on land, it's dragging ruts into the sand. So what was described here? A large crocodile, a whale, a shark. I was noticing even in notes on my Christian Standard Bible here that they think it's a crocodile. The problem is that description does not fit any form of crocodile we have ever seen. But that's where the kind of the standard for a lot of apologists who don't really do the work go with, well, it's a crocodile, because that's a creature that we know today. Well, it was a really big one. Were there bigger crocodiles around today? Yeah, we have skeletons of them. But look at that entire description in Job. It does not fit a crocodile. A whale or shark, particularly even a crocodile, they fail to completely fit all of the descriptions that God gives. And when God describes something, he describes it. This isn't an accident. He's the one who made it. He knows all about it. See, based on the biblical description that God gave, it seems more likely that the Leviathan is a large sea reptile. We have the scales. And possibly a species of dinosaur, something along the lines of a plesiosaurus. This fits the description far better. These things were massive, but it could coil and twist around. When they came up on land, leaving huge ruts in the land, and when it swam, it displaced a lot of water. Now, am I saying it was a plesiosaurus? No, because there are a number of creatures that are similar. We also see in God's creation, he doesn't just create one, he tends to create a lot of things that are variations on a theme. But the description fits this far better than any crocodile. Any crocodile. Job's acquaintance with a dinosaur is not far-fetched, given that the book of Job is set in a time before the Tower of Babel. So the book of Job happens sometime after, obviously, the end of the flood, and Noah's sons have gone in, and they've formed families, and they've gone in, done cities, and begun to go in. And before everything's divided up, we have the book of Job somewhere happening in that time frame. There's still not a whole lot of people on the planet. Now, the fire breath. See, all the rest of that, some Bible scholars or some readers will go in and they're fine with all of the description right up until they get the fire breath. Then they're going, okay, all right. This is the stuff of legend. Fire-breathing dragons, all of that nonsense. So, even particularly those who see this as a large crocodile, they look at this one descriptor and they look at that as hyperbole. They accept all of the rest of the descriptors and then throw this one out as hyperbole. I have a problem with that. So God is giving all these great descriptions of this unbelievable creature that he says he's in control of. But when you get to this, we go, okay, well that's obviously nonsense. That's something that God added on extra to really scare people. Because that's the way God works. He just, is giving perfect description and then adds something else. And just because there's no creature alive today that's like this doesn't mean there never was. We have to be real careful not to say our current world is exactly the way that the world has always been. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports that in 793 AD, when the Vikings raided a small island, Lindisfarne, that fiery dragons were seen flying in the sky. That's what they wrote at the time. Again, we have this same descriptor in multiple peoples around the planet. Yes?
I was just wondering, could that be like around the time where anybody started coming up with that, like the ability to firepower?
Well, we also have to understand, see, we are products of our television, movies, and modern day writing. We see fire as a fireball coming out of this dragon's mouth. I know none of you actually watch Game of Thrones. Liars. Or what was the movie with Sean Connery where he was the voice of the dragon? Dragonheart. There's been a number, and we've built the story, and now everybody takes that piece of the story and continues it as fire being a literal, their neck glows and this ball of fire, because that's what we have invented for modern day thinking. But there is a creature out there right now, that some of you may have heard of, called the bombardier beetle. I heard about the bombardier beetle when I went for my freshman year of college to Christian Heritage College over in San Diego that no longer exists. If you're into creationism, whatnot, two of my professors were Henry Morris and Dwayne Gish. And if you read anything in creation science, these were two big-time scientists, they were at that little school. These were giants in their fields. I was phenomenally blessed to have sat under Henry Morris and Dwayne Gish. One of the creatures they talked about was the bombardier beetle, and how this little guy should never have evolved. Because what he does, this is the bombardier beetle. When a predator is coming at him, his little body mixes hydrogen peroxide. His body makes hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone. It puts them together. That forms an explosive acid that burns the enemy. If you go to pick one up, he'll squirt you and you will get a chemical burn. Fire.
Where do they live?
Madagascar, Africa, I think in Indonesia, not here. But creationists look at that and say, what part of evolution is going to evolve a creature developing hydrogen peroxide in their body? Or the other one, and then holding them in two sacks to put them together, because if they ever touch, he blows up in a fireball. So we have a creature alive today that produces a burn. What the ancients would have said would have been fire. We have to not go with TV and movies and think that it is a fireball. So if that creature is there, again, what is the possibility? Is it within the realm of possibility or probability then that another creature could have also had those same abilities? Again, I'm not drawing a direct line, but I'm showing that the possibility is there. So that takes the line of that he breathes fire out of hyperbole. Because if God designed this once, and we see God often does this, he designs a number of creatures that are similar, that have similar capabilities, that could have produced an acid that burns. It's within the realm of possibility. Basically what I'm showing is that we should not take that line out when God's describing a creature as hyperbole, because we have a creature that produces burns now. You will think you just dipped your finger into a fire if you pick this little guy up. Yeah. known as the bombardier beetle. The point that God is making to Job, and this is the most important part of it really, I don't want to get lost in, again, all the details. The point that God was making to Job is that this incredible creature, Leviathan, is under his sovereign control. That this thing that man can't take, that man with all of his weapons can't take, you don't put a fish hook into him. You don't try to put a lance into him. You leave him alone. God said, you're in for the fight of your life if you take this guy on. And Job obviously understood it. God's not describing some mythological creature that Job, because then what would that have meant to Job? When God's describing this creature, Job's going, what are you even talking about? He's describing a creature that Job is well versed in. I know this creature. I've talked to other guys who've gone on the ocean, had one swim by, and they said, leave him alone. A few years ago, when my brothers and I were up deep sea fishing up in Alaska, we got in between two islands, we hunkered down, we're going for some bottom fish, and all of a sudden the captain yells, reel your lines, reel your lines. And we're reeling our lines in. And just at that, moments later, this huge humpback whale comes right beside our ship. He said they do this, they find the ship, they know you're finding fish, so they come along to figure out, what are you looking for? He said they're very, very smart creatures. And we're all standing on the side of the ship going, and he was bigger than our boat. You've all seen Jaws, you're going to need a bigger boat? I was thinking, we need a bigger boat. This thing is massive. He said, that's a big female, she's just looking for something to eat. And sure enough, she went on her way. And we went back to fishing. So, our captain was very well aware of this. Job was aware of this. God wasn't describing something that Job says, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's pretty cool, whatever you're talking about, but I don't know. And God's saying, look, I have this creature under my sovereign control. It doesn't do anything that I don't allow. And if God created Leviathan, that Job can't stand up against, then how much greater is God? See, when you get into, I love the book of Job anyway, particularly when God starts speaking. And you remember, how does God speak in the first place? Out of a storm. And then he starts talking to Job. Again, something that man can't control. We just had the hurricane. We can't control those. God speaks out of a massive storm. So I'm going to show you my power.
Yes.
And he tells Job, if I can create a creature like this that you can't control, how much greater is the creator of a creature like that? So he basically tells Job, why are you even trying to argue with me, dude? Why are you questioning me when I can show you what I can do, what I've made? Now, one last thing about Leviathan, and I wasn't going to include this, but there's so much of this garbage on the internet, and you may come across it, so I've included it here this morning. It's also very big with some faith healer groups and shyster types, and they talk about the Leviathan spirit. By the way, from now on, I'm going to tell you nothing but nonsense. But it's out there, and I want you to know and be educated. So when you hear it, when you come up against it, you go, okay, I know about this. Again, very big in the faith healing community, the Leviathan spirit. In this interpretation, the descriptions are all entirely spiritual. These are no physical descriptions of anything. Especially the relationship of the Hebrew word, I'm just going to put it on the screen, but that's what we get Leviathan. The idea of twisting or coiling. Based only on this, and this alone, They extrapolate the existence of a specific demonic entity that oppresses people, the Leviathan spirit. And it's supposedly the cause of twisting, that coiling and twisting, the twisting of people's words, turning people against each other and instigating unrest. So you will come against one of these faith healers, and they will say, "You've got the Leviathan spirit, you're twisting my words." No, I'm telling the truth. Others argue that the spirit of Leviathan causes stubbornness and rebellion against God, or the spirit is blamed for various physical problems, usually involving stiffness and back problems. So again, the faith healer will come up, "You have a spirit of Leviathan, Rick. I'm going to heal you of that. I'm going to remove that spirit of Leviathan in there that's giving you back problems." Even insomnia, a lack of spiritual growth, and media deception, all under the spirit of Leviathan. There is no biblical reason to believe that there is a demonic entity named Leviathan, or that Christians have a specific ability to rebuke it or exorcise it. Period. Okay, I've made that statement strong enough. So if you end up reading, doing your own study, or you go across the internet and you get this spirit Leviathan, I want to tell you right now, you are looking at the lie of the devil himself. There is no biblical reason for saying that there is a spirit of Leviathan or a demon named Leviathan or anything else. God described an animal to Job that Job knew, to show his own power, period. So Leviathan, again, all kinds of craziness. I mean, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, just go on the internet, type in Leviathan, and you will go down rabbit holes. Most of it is nonsense. There's another creature that God describes, again, in the book of Job, and we see him pop up a couple of times. Behemoth. Also, this creature has been blown up, and people trying to make a mess out of what does this mean, and young earth and old earth creationists coming in to argue about these two creatures. Because if they existed as they are, then old earth creationists have a problem. Because the dinosaurs died millions and millions and millions of years ago.
Could they be describing the woolly mammoth?
Let's get a description of it. God's description of this animal focuses on its great size and strength, and then compares it to how small and frail Job is. Job says, okay. God says, we talked about Leviathan, let's talk about Behemoth. How about this guy? Look how massive he is and how small and frail you are there, Job. Our modern day use of this word, we still use it. It held over. And it means anything of monstrous size or power. We talk about things being a behemoth, a huge ship, and we still use that term. And it always refers to immense size. The animal, again, was apparently very familiar to Job, because God is describing something that Job's not going, what are you talking about? And it's described as unstoppable and fearless. It's impossible, again, to accurately identify it, much like I'm not saying that Leviathan is a plesiosaurus, although the description kind of fits it, but there are a number of creatures, other sauruses that have similar to that. Even think of creatures like the Loch Ness Monster tends to fit that same description, and we have those descriptors around the planet in places. But it's going to be a creature like that. The description for Behemoth: he's a plant eater. this is in Job chapter 40, verses 15 to 24. Let me read his description, and then we'll go through it. Look at Behemoth. God, again, I can almost see him taking Job's chin and going, look at this. None of you ever did that with your kids. Look at me.
All the time.
Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you. Again, the days of creation. When did God create animals? Day 6. When did he create man? Day 6. God said, I created this guy right along with you. He eats grass like an ox. Look at the strength of his loins and the power in the muscles of his belly. He stiffens his tail like a cedar tree. The tendons of his thighs are woven firmly together. His bones are bronze tubes. His limbs are like iron rods. He is the foremost of God's works. Only his maker can draw the sword against him. Wow. The hills yield food for him while all sorts of wild animals play there. He lies under the lotus plants, hiding in the protection of marshy reeds. Lotus plants cover him with their shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Though the rivers rage, Behemoth is unafraid. So the rivers get in their annual spring floods. He's too big to care. Flood all the way. He remains confident, even if the Jordan surges up to the level of his mouth. Can anyone capture him while he looks on, or pierce his nose with snares? So God gives another description of a creature that Job isn't scratching his head about. He's going, oh yeah, look at that monster. So he lives near water, at home in a flooded raging river, very strong and muscular, ranks first among the works of God, has a massive tail that moves like a cedar. Does that describe a woolly mammoth? Y'all been to and seen an elephant? I've been to Africa. One of them walked up to Addie one day. We were in a Jeep. They were all going to water. All of a sudden, a big female broke off and came over, and the driver of the Jeep said, sit very still. We sat very still. And she came over and reached in and looked at us, and Addie, my little Addie, who's now 27, not so little. 27, that's just wrong. She was sitting on the outside because she wanted to see all the animals, right? And this elephant comes in and examines her, and then goes back and gets in line and heads for water with everybody else, and we're all going, because I thought, how do I explain to Cindy that an elephant grabbed Addie out of the chair? But have you ever seen an elephant tail?
Yeah.
Doesn't look anything like a cedar tree. How big are cedar trees, Rick? You're a tree guy.
Big.
Massive. Huge. Cedar trees are often used to describe great height and strength in the Old Testament because they are a massive, massive tree. And it says his tail looks like a cedar tree. That's no elephant, woolly mammoth, or anything else. And God's describing this thing, and Noah's going, Now, commentators have now, again, trying to use modern creatures, particularly old earthers, who can't possibly have something like a dinosaur works with man, and they say, well, this is probably a hippo, or a rhino, or an elephant. I've been up and close and personal with all three of those in the wild when I went to Africa. Again, a hippo tail. Now, hippos are very dangerous. You know that hippos kill more people in Africa than anything else. Far and away. Second place isn't even close. And everybody goes, oh, hippo. Don't mess with the hippos. But they don't have a tail anything like a cedar tree.
One of the old dinosaurs, what was that? That he had the tail that it had spikes.
Yeah, there's several that had that. So, the tail alone Just the description of the tail that God gave. Again, this is God describing something he made. That description eliminates anything that's alive today. Takes everything that's on the planet alive today and eliminates it. Nothing has a tail like a cedar that lives on land and lives in the marsh areas. Other theories is that it is a type, and particularly amongst young earth creationists who have no problem with dinosaurs being around with people, think it to be some sort of a dinosaur, something like the Diplodocus or the Apatosaurus. There's the Diplodocus, or an artist rendition of it based on the bones we have found. Here's a similar creature, because again, God tends to do similar creatures, the Apatosaurus. But look at the tails on those things. These things are massive. A person would come up to about their knees, a little bigger. That's a tail like a cedar on either one of those. Those of you that have kids and had all the land before times, you would refer to them as a long neck. They were plant eaters. They lived in the marshlands. They were afraid of nothing, because what is going to attack them? Nothing. Not when they're at full size, as babies, very definitely. So God is describing, so these are, both of these, and there's a number of others, are known as sauropods. They were the largest of all land animals. They were marsh-dwelling plant eaters, had tails like trees, and could easily be called the king of the animal world. We have Leviathan, the king of the seas, and we have Behemoth, the king of the land. Nothing can stop either of these. God goes and grabs the two biggest, baddest creatures, one on land and one on sea, and describes them both to Job. And Job's not going, what are you talking about? What is that? Is that something that died out millions of years ago that I have no clue what you're talking about? Or is that something that you said, yep. Those are those massive things that live down by the marsh areas, and we kind of leave them alone. They don't hurt us, we don't hurt them. According, again, to the creation story, animals and man were created on the same day, day 6. And we know that Noah took a mating pair of every kind of land animal on the ark. And we do not know whether you are an atheist or a pantheist or a theist, an old earth creationist, a young earth creationist, any other way you want to describe yourself. We do not know when the dinosaurs went extinct. We guess. We hypothesize. That's all we do. We don't know. And recently, 2 years ago, they found some dinosaur flesh that had viable DNA and flesh in it. That's not supposed to happen if it's billions of years old. It should have long since dissolved, turned to stone, whatnot.
Thousands of years.
In thousands of years, it's gone. Noah took that mating pair of animals, so it's scripturally possible that some of them would still have remained in Job's day, which is sometime between post-ark and the Tower of Babel. Because as Noah is releasing all these creatures to again fill the earth, as God said they would do, he's going to take a mating pair of everything. That would have included dinosaurs. Now, thinking about logistics, are you going to take a couple of Apatosauruses on the ark? Babies. Or a couple of eggs. Go to their nesting and hatch them. There's a number of theories now how that works, but God made sure that all of his creations were moving pre and post flood. So at the time of the writing of Job, the first writings of the Old Testament, before the Tower of Babel happens, the possibility is still very, very high. Because we even see in the time of Marco Polo, him describing a creature that if you didn't know that was Marco Polo, you would have said, hey, that's from some movie or book describing a T-Rex or a velociraptor or one of those types of creatures running around with the big to help Job remember his place in creation, the real message, which is the message to Job, God points him to the two strongest creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan, and says, I'm going to take you to the top of the food chain on both of them and show you that I made these. I control them. God said about Behemoth, I'm the only one that can take a sword to him. You can't. I come up to the knees of a creature and the tail like a cedar. You know what? You go do your thing. You're fine. They were both incredibly powerful and frightening and were uncontrollable by anyone except God. The pride and glory of man compares to the untamable strength of these animals. So how much humbler should man be in God's presence? How much humbler should I be approaching my God if my God can make something like that and then control it? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And that's the point. That's the whole point of God bringing up these creatures to Job. Neither Job nor anyone else has the right to criticize God's work. Any of God's work. Even the stuff we say ain't right. The one who created Behemoth is worthy of our reverence, our awe, and our worship. Because God made that perfectly to live in the environment that he created for it.
Haven't scientists reported the carbon dating of the remains of dinosaurs?
Yeah, around the rocks around them that they have fossilized into. The problem with some of that as well is, again, I know my audience here, so I can't use this in my current courses with 18-year-olds. You all remember Mount St. Helens, right? We already have fossilized trees from Mount St. Helens in your lifetime. That got buried, got in, and have become fossilized, or have become rock. The same fossilized trees that you can see up in other places, up in northern Arizona and whatnot, that are millions of years old. This has happened in your lifetime. We have layers of rock that are now, because of all the layers of this, when the mountainside came down and the water, all that other stuff, that have hardened into layers. All within, not millions of years, within a decade or two. So we're beginning to rethink, not carbon dating, although carbon dating has also had a problem. We've carbon dated things that we know when they were made and they came out wrong. So it's
yeah, some of the carbon dating, I mean, you sent it to 2 different labs.
and two completely different.
Variety. And when they made the calculations to figure out the carbon dating, they didn't actually know how old anything was, so they had to make an assumption for their preliminary testing, and they assumed millions of years.
So you start with an assumption and then you fill in the details afterwards. But like I said, we've seen just in Mount St. Helens, in the United States, here where we can test it, that we have rock layers that have been laid down inside of a decade, not in millions of years. Trees fossilized, becoming rock in a decade or two, not in millions of years. So the collective we, science, is beginning to really question, but they really want to hold on to old Earth, and particularly no God, because if there's a God, now you have a lot of other questions you have to answer very quickly.
Okay, so I have a page in my Bible, I'll take a picture and bring it in. But it literally goes, it says science and it says the Bible and it says the science, because science said this, the Bible said this, and then later the science catches up to the Bible.
Yeah, it tends to do that. It tends to do that a lot.
Yeah, it's really cool.
All right, so we have Leviathan. We have Behemoth, both described by God to somebody who understood what they were as real creatures. We still don't know. I do not say that they are an Apatosaurus and a Plesiosaurus, but they're going to be something along those lines. We know both of those creatures lived. We have their bones. We can see them. We've rebuilt them. So it's something along those lines. Now, for those of you that are KJVers, this next section is just for you. The rest of you get to listen. Because there are some mythological creatures mentioned in the King James that more modern translations have eliminated. But, again, critics of Christianity and the Bible love to go back in because, well, that's the authorized version. It says so right in page 1. And it mentions satyrs, unicorns, and cockatrices. So let's look at those three very quickly. The satyrs, that's half man, half goat. Greek and Roman mythology and other Middle Eastern societies have this creature. Now, the King James Version was translated in the early 1600s. By the way, I am not anti-King James. I have one. I have a number of Bible verses in my head that are in the King James because that's the way I memorized them as a child. And I still love the beauty of the language of the King James. But I want to dispel some criticisms and some things that are going on out there. While the King James is very commendable for its overall accuracy and style, it does have a few weaknesses. And one is that when the translators of the Old Testament came across a Hebrew word of uncertain meaning, they sometimes used an exotic English word to replace it. So satyrs. In Isaiah 13:21, 34:14, the King James Version translates this word sair as satyr. The Hebrew word is translated 55 times in the Old Testament as he-goat or hairy. The word was also thought, though, at the time of the translation, to imply demon worship associated with goats. And so we find the word translated twice, that sair as devil, and twice as the mythological creature satyr. So if you're reading from the King James, a couple times you'll read the word satyr, referring to that man-goat. But based on the context, and remember, context is king. A text without a context is a pretext. Text is king. Based on the context, it's almost certain that wild goats are intended and not the goat man of mythology. Particularly when we see that 55 other times that word is translated as he-goat or hairy, because your wild goats tend to be very hairy.
Thanks, Harry.
So it is not a goat man. Don't not read the King James, but understand what you're reading when you come across that word. The next mythological creature that they love to pick out of the Bible and say, well, see, this is all a bunch of nonsense, is a unicorn. If you've had a little girl or a granddaughter, unicorns have probably been a part of their personal room decoration, generally with rainbow colors. The Hebrew word ra'im signifies a horned animal similar to the aurochs. a now extinct ancestor of today's domestic cattle. By the way, the collective we of humanity, is busy trying to resurrect the auroch using DNA and breeding, and they're trying to resurrect the predecessor of modern day cattle. For reasons unknown, the translators of the King James Version chose to substitute the word unicorn for the name of this horned animal each time it occurred. We have no idea why they used unicorn.
So the first Webster's Dictionary that was published, I think in 1828, uses the word unicorn as a definition under the single-horned rhinoceros versus the two-horned rhino.
Yeah.
So that word was synonymous
With a whole different creature than some beautiful white horse that also, might fly or do magic or.
But that's how we use it now. But in the 1800s,
It was yet something different again.
It was just a rhino.
But the original Hebrew word, the re'im,
It was ox.
is an ox, is a type of ancient cattle. The Bible never mentions a mythical one-horned horse in the original language. Ever. So don't fall for those traps of people saying, well, there's all these mythological creatures in the Old Testament. The last one I want to hit, we got just like a minute, is known, and probably something you don't know a lot about, is called the cockatrice. The cockatrice is a legendary monster that is one half rooster and one half snake, with the ability to turn people into stone at a glance. The cockatrice is this legendary monster. At the time of the writing of the King James Version, the cockatrice was a pervasive myth in Britain. That's what was talked about all the time. That's what you scared your children with, that stay close to the home. You don't want to get, the cockatrice to get you. It was used to translate the Hebrew word tsetzpa, which properly means poisonous serpent or viper. So the King James translators used the mythology of their day and put in cockatrice as opposed to what the term tsetzpa commonly means, which is poisonous serpent or viper. Of course, the cockatrice was half serpent. In 4 of its 5 occurrences, John Wycliffe used the term cockatrice in his 1382 Bible, so several hundred years before the King James, when John Wycliffe brought it into English and got killed for it. And the King James translators appeared to have done a 1600 version of copy and paste. So that's nothing new to today's modern day student to go copy and paste. I have a Bible from the Geneva Bible from the 1500s, and you will find there are huge swaths of it that are copied and pasted word for word into the King James. Again, more than 100 and some odd years before the King James was written. So, satyrs, unicorns, cockatrice. If you're reading the King James and you come across these mythological creatures, now you know. If you have somebody wanting to just try and destroy your faith, say there's these mythological creatures, now you know. Yes?
So are you saying that dragons, I know they're very popular in the Asian community, that they are not demonic?
No. They have been associated with demons and evil and worship and whatnot, and have taken on that connotation. My brother-in-law is Chinese. That's his culture. But he's looked into it and said, you know what, we're staying away from the dragons because of what the culture has made them. But the creature itself, not in our storybooks and movies, was some sort of a creature that people around the globe knew and recognized because they wrote about it. Now, then they added to it and made the demons and all this other stuff to it. And so my brother-in-law, as a Chinese guy, says, I'm sticking away from dragons only because I know my culture and I know what they have associated it with. But the creature itself was some sort of a creature that people around the globe knew and recognized, wrote about. Marco Polo described it. Demystifying the Bible? I hope so. Make it understandable? I think so. That's what God intended. That's what he intended to Job. He described two creatures to Job that Job knew. Dana, would you close us this morning?
Father God, we're thankful that we can come before you, and thankful for the message that Harry brought today, the lesson, to understand more about your creation and how you are in control of all. Though we don't know these creatures today, Father, but we know that you did create them and they were here on this earth. And they were used by your example to demonstrate your great strength. So Father, just remind us of who you are, so we know. Give us now as we prepare to go to your worship time. And we pray.
Amen.